December 1944, German-occupied airfield somewhere in Belgium. The attack was over. 3 American fighters climbed northwest, contrails scratching white lines against gray winter sky, growing smaller until they disappeared into cloud cover. The flak guns fell silent. Ground crews emerged from shelters, assessing damage. 2 wrecks burned on the runway, American P-47s that had pushed their strafing runs too low, stayed too long, paid the price. The airfield had survived another strike. Weber stood near the operations building, watching his men work. They were dragging debris off the main runway, clearing a path for the 190s that would need to take off within the hour. Smoke rose in 2 black columns where the American aircraft had crashed. One of his gun crews had scored direct hits on both attackers. Effective work. The Americans were getting aggressive, hitting airfields deep in occupied territory, accepting losses that would have been unthinkable a year ago. But aggressive didn't mean successful. Then he saw the 4th aircraft. It came in low from the east, trailing smoke, engine sputtering, not climbing like the others, descending. The P-47 clipped the tree line at the airfield's edge, bounced hard across frozen grass, and slid to a stop 200 meters from where Weber stood. Metal screamed against earth. The propeller tore free, tumbling end over end. Pieces of cowling scattered across the ground. The aircraft was dying, but the pilot was still alive. Weber ran toward the wreckage. His men followed, 4 soldiers from the flak crew, weapons ready. The P-47 sat at an angle, nose down, tail high, one wing crumpled. The canopy was jammed. They could see the pilot inside, moving, trying to push it open. "Get him out," Weber ordered. 2 soldiers climbed onto the wing, found the emergency release, forced the canopy back. The American pilot was young, maybe 22, 23 years old. Blood ran from a cut above his left eye. His flight suit was torn at the shoulder. His face was pale, expression blank. They grabbed him under the arms, pulled him from the cockpit, dragged him clear of the aircraft in case it exploded. Weber stood over him, Luger drawn, watching the American struggle to his feet. The pilot was unarmed. His .45 pistol was gone, probably lost during the crash. He swayed slightly, steadied himself, looked up at Weber and the 4 German soldiers surrounding him. For a moment, nobody moved. The Americans' eyes weren't focused on Weber. They were scanning, not the panicked scanning of a defeated man searching for escape routes, something methodical. His gaze moved across the airfield in a deliberate pattern. He looked at the 2 burning wrecks on the runway. At the flak positions, their barrels still elevated, tracking the departed American fighters. At the dispersal area 50 meters away where 6 190s sat in neat rows, undamaged. At something beyond the tree line that Weber couldn't see from this angle. Then the American laughed. Not a nervous chuckle, not hysteria, a genuine laugh, the sound of a man who had just heard excellent news. His shoulders shook. He was still bleeding, still surrounded by enemy soldiers with weapons aimed at his chest, still standing on German-controlled territory with no hope of escape. And he was laughing. Weber's expression shifted from contempt to confusion. His men exchanged glances. Why was the American laughing? What could possibly be funny about his situation? Weber said, gesturing with the Luger, "Drop weapons, universal language." The American raised his hand slowly, still smiling. "No weapons." His eyes continued scanning the airfield, noting details, as if memorizing the layout. What was he looking at? Weber stepped closer, pistol aimed at the pilot's chest. The American was bleeding more heavily now, the cut above his eye dripping onto his flight suit. He needed medical attention. He needed to be searched, interrogated, transported to a POW facility. Standard procedure for downed enemy aircrew. But first, Weber needed to understand why this man was laughing. Weber demanded, "Why are you laughing?" The American didn't speak German. He just kept smiling, kept looking around as if Weber wasn't there. As if the 4 armed soldiers weren't there. As if being captured on an enemy airfield was somehow amusing. Behind them, the ground crew was still working on the runway. The fires were being contained. The airfield was returning to operational status. In 10 minutes, they'd have the main runway clear. In 20, fighters could launch. Everything was under control. Except this American pilot, bleeding and surrounded, was laughing like he knew something Weber didn't. Robert Eugene had been born in 1922 on a small farm in rural Ohio. His childhood was defined by work, animals to feed before school, fences to mend after, 18-hour days in summer, the same in winter with frozen hands and shorter light. What set him apart was pattern recognition. When a tractor engine wouldn't start, he could diagnose the problem by sound. When crops failed in one section but thrived in another, he traced it to drainage patterns invisible to everyone else. Aviation entered his life through county fair barnstormers in the late 1930s. He watched them loop and roll above the fairgrounds, saw how the aircraft responded to inputs he couldn't see, felt something shift inside him. The machines made sense. Their physics were logical, their movements predictable if you understood the forces. By the time war came, was working as a mechanic at a small Indiana airfield. He knew aircraft from the ground up, systems, limitations, quirks. He'd logged unofficial stick time with pilots who let him take controls during repositioning flights. He enlisted in the Army Air Forces in early 1942 not from patriotic fervor, but because it was logical. Flight training came easily, not because he was naturally gifted, but because he paid attention to details others ignored. He noticed how aircraft behaved in different configurations. He memorized the subtle sounds indicating problems before they became emergencies. He developed an almost intuitive understanding of his machine. By summer 1944, when he shipped overseas, had more flight hours than most pilots his age. He'd also developed a reputation his squadron mates found both admirable and unsettling. He thought too much. While other pilots relied on instinct and aggression, approached combat like chess, always considering what came next, always looking for angles. He flew P-47 Thunderbolts with the 362nd Fighter Squadron, 357th Fighter Group, based in Suffolk. By December 1944, fighter doctrine had evolved. Early in the war, their role was purely defensive, stay close to bomber formations, drive off attackers. But now command encouraged aggressive action, pursue enemy aircraft to the ground, strafe airfields, destroy the Luftwaffe wherever it could be found. The new philosophy was producing results. It also came with costs. Going low meant entering the domain of light flak 20 and 37 guns that could shred aircraft in seconds. It meant small arms fire from every direction. It meant that one lucky shot could leave you stranded deep in enemy territory. This morning's mission had been standard escort duty, bombers hitting industrial targets, expected opposition moderate to heavy, weather uncertain. Flight had spotted a German airfield during the return leg. Small installation, maybe a dozen aircraft visible, light defenses. The decision to attack had been immediate. American doctrine explicitly encouraged these opportunistic strikes. They came in from the west at 500 feet, spread in line abreast formation, targeted a dispersal area where 190s sat exposed. His 8.50 caliber machine guns hammered, tracers walking across the target area. He saw fuel tanks rupture, aircraft catch fire. Then something hit his P-47, maybe a 20 shell, maybe just debris, and the engine started coming apart. Oil pressure dropped to zero, temperature spiked. The Whitney R-2800 began grinding, metal on metal, power falling away. He had maybe 90 seconds before complete seizure, too far from friendly lines, too low to bail out safely. The airfield he'd just attacked was directly ahead. Made his decision in less than a second, put it down on enemy territory, hoped the crash was survivable, hope for what? Rescue? Escape? He didn't know. But it was better than bailing out at 300 feet and breaking both legs on landing. The approach was nightmare flying, fighting a dying aircraft with no hydraulics, minimal control authority, ground rushing up too fast. He clipped trees, hit hard, slid. Everything went sideways and forward at once. Metal screamed, then silence. He was alive, bleeding, surrounded, and now, standing in the middle of a German airfield with weapons pointed at him, he was laughing. The human mind generates explanations for anomalous behavior. Weber's brain was doing this now, running through possibilities, trying to understand why an American pilot would laugh at gunpoint. First theory: shock, combat trauma. The crash had broken something in the pilot's mind. Laughing was a stress response, involuntary, meaningless. This happened sometimes. Men under extreme pressure exhibited irrational behavior. The laugh meant nothing except that the American's nervous system was overloaded. Weber studied the pilot's face, looking for signs of psychological breakdown. But the American's eyes weren't vacant. They were focused, alert, still scanning the airfield methodically. This wasn't shock. This was something else. Second theory: assessment. Maybe the pilot was scanning for targets, memorizing layout for future intelligence reports. American aircrew were debriefed extensively after missions. Even captured pilots provided valuable information about enemy installations during interrogation. Maybe the laugh was bravado, a show of defiance before inevitable questioning. But that didn't make sense either. Why laugh now? He was captured. The information wouldn't help him, and the scanning seemed too deliberate, too focused on specific details. He kept looking at the dispersal areas, the fuel storage visible beyond trees, the ammunition depot marked by earthen berms. Third theory: escape planning. Maybe the Americans saw something Weber didn't, a gap in the perimeter, a route through the trees, an opportunity. Maybe the laugh was confidence, a signal that he believed he could get away. Weber glanced around. His men had the pilot surrounded. The tree line was 200 meters away across open ground. There were soldiers everywhere, ground crews, gun positions. Escape was impossible. Unless the American was insane, he had to know that. Fourth theory: he didn't understand his situation. Maybe the pilot thought this was somehow not real, that he'd be rescued immediately, that being shot down meant automatic safety. Some American pilots were naive about the realities of ground combat. But service patches indicated experience. This wasn't his first mission. He knew what capture meant. Weber was running out of rational explanations. The American just kept smiling, kept looking around, his gaze returning again and again to specific points around the airfield. What was he seeing? Then Weber noticed something. The pilot's eyes kept flicking upward, not at the flak guns, not at the trees, higher, scanning the sky above the airfield. What was up there? Weber looked up. Gray clouds at maybe 1,500 meters. Nothing visible. The American fighters had departed minutes ago, climbing northwest. The sky was empty, but kept looking up, kept smiling as if waiting for something. What new, what Weber and the German soldiers didn't yet understand, was about to become devastatingly clear. During his approach, while fighting to control his dying aircraft, had seen his 3 wingmen break off their attack and climb away. Standard procedure after taking fire, but he'd also seen something else. One of them, he couldn't tell which pilot, had begun a wide circling pattern at altitude instead of heading directly home. That circling pattern meant everything. American fighter doctrine in December 1944 was explicit and aggressive. When a pilot went down, surviving flight members marked the position and radioed for assistance. They didn't just report the location and leave. They called in other flights. They coordinated rescue, or if rescue wasn't possible, they coordinated strikes against any enemy forces in the area. The circling aircraft had a radio. That radio could reach other American fighters within a 50-mile radius. And American fighters returning from escort missions, fighters with full ammunition loads and nothing better to do than hunt targets of opportunity, were always eager to hit enemy airfields. Had done the calculation while being pulled from his cockpit. His wingman had been circling for approximately 2 minutes before crashed. Time to radio, 30 seconds. Time for response, 30 seconds. Time for vectoring, 2 minutes. Time for the nearest American fighters to reach this location at attack speed, 5 minutes from the radio call. Total elapsed time from crash to incoming attack, approximately 6 minutes. He'd been on the ground for 5 minutes and 30 seconds, which meant he had approximately 30 seconds left. Maybe 40, depending on how far away the responding fighters had been when they got the call. But not much more than that. American P-47s cruised at 300 miles per hour, at full throttle closer to 400. From 20 miles out, that was 3 minutes of flight time. From 10 miles, 90 seconds. The math was simple. The conclusion was obvious. And the laugh was genuine relief, mixed with understanding of what was about to happen to this airfield. Had spent those 5 minutes observing, not because he was planning intelligence reports or escape routes, but because he was identifying targets for the incoming strike. The dispersal area with 6 exposed 190s. The fuel storage beyond the trees, visible to him at ground level, probably not visible to pilots coming in high. The ammunition depot with its distinctive earthen berms. The operations building where officers would be coordinating responses. He'd been laughing because these Germans thought they'd captured an enemy pilot. What they'd actually done was provide target coordinates to a man who understood American doctrine better than they did. They'd given him 5 minutes to assess their airfield's vulnerabilities while standing in the middle of the kill zone. Now, as Weber stood over him demanding answers in German, as the ground crew continued clearing debris from the runway, as the flak guns remained oriented northwest where the departed American fighters had gone, heard it. Engines. Multiple radial engines at full power, coming in fast from the southeast, not the northwest where the Germans were watching, the opposite direction, low enough that the tree line had masked their approach until the last possible moment. Weber's head snapped toward the sound, his pistol arm dropped. For one frozen second, he seemed paralyzed by the realization of what that sound meant. Stopped laughing. He dropped flat to the ground, covered his head with his arms, made himself as small as possible against the frozen earth. The first P-47 Thunderbolts came in at treetop height, their 8.50 caliber guns already firing. What happened next lasted 41 seconds. From the first tracer round to the last, from the moment the lead P-47 opened fire to the moment the last aircraft pulled up and climbed away, 41 seconds. Experienced it from ground level, face pressed into frozen dirt, hands over his head, body curled into a protective ball. The sound was overwhelming. The roar of radial engines at full military power filled his chest and skull, making thought impossible, reducing existence to pure sensory overload. He could follow the pattern of attack even without seeing it. He'd flown enough strafing runs to recognize the choreography. Lead element coming from the southeast, catching the flak positions while they were still oriented northwest. 4 aircraft in loose formation, spacing themselves to cover the maximum area. Their .50 caliber guns hammered in overlapping bursts, the sound like tearing metal amplified 1,000 times. The flak guns tried to respond. He heard the distinctive thump-thump-thump of 20 fire, tracers arcing upward, but the American fighters had caught them pointing the wrong direction. By the time the gun crews swung their barrels around, the first wave was already past, climbing, braking left and right. Second element came in 30 seconds behind the first, splitting to cover different sectors. Heard the crescendo of engines from multiple directions simultaneously. These pilots were targeting the dispersal areas he'd been scanning. The exposed 190s that sat in neat rows like targets on a range. The sound of .50 caliber fire hitting aircraft was distinctive, a series of sharp cracks as rounds punched through aluminum skin, followed by deeper thuds as they hit structural components. Then the secondary explosions, fuel tanks cooking off, ammunition detonating. The bass-heavy thump of ordnance exploding in contained spaces. Heat washed over in waves. He kept his face down, felt the burning air pass over his exposed neck and hands. The smell was overwhelming. Aviation fuel, cordite, burning rubber, hot metal. The particular odor of mechanical death that he knew from maintenance work, amplified to nightmare intensity. Debris rained down around him. Metal fragments, pieces of aircraft skin, spent brass casings from the attacking fighters. Something heavy hit the ground 3 meters away with enough force to bounce. He didn't look up to see what it was. The third element came in at 45 seconds. By now the airfield was chaos. Ground crews were running in every direction, some toward shelters, some toward firefighting equipment, some just running. The flak guns were firing wildly, tracers crossing at wrong angles, more dangerous to the Germans on the ground than to the American fighters who were already pulling up and away. Heard voices screaming in German. Heard the distinctive crack of small arms fire, rifles, machine guns, soldiers shooting at aircraft that were moving too fast to hit. Heard the concussive impacts of more fuel tanks exploding, more ammunition cooking off, more secondary detonations that meant the strike was achieving exactly what it was designed to achieve. Through it all, he kept his face pressed against frozen dirt, hands over his head, waiting for it to end. The last P pulled up and climbed away after 41 seconds. The sound of engines faded. The machine gun fire stopped. What remained was chaos, fires burning, men shouting, secondary explosions continuing at irregular intervals. Didn't move yet. Debris was still falling. Fires were spreading. The ground trembled as something large exploded in the distance, probably the ammunition depot catching fire. He waited another 30 seconds. The shouting intensified. He could hear German voices giving orders, trying to organize response, trying to save what could be saved. Nobody was paying attention to one American pilot lying in the dirt. Finally lifted his head. The airfield was destroyed. All 6 190s in the dispersal area were burning. The operations building had taken multiple hits. One wall collapsed, roof partially caved in. The fuel storage area beyond the trees was completely engulfed in flames, black smoke rising in a column that would be visible for miles. The runway was cratered in 3 places. The flak positions were silent, either damaged or abandoned. Bodies lay scattered across the tarmac. Couldn't tell how many. Some were moving, some weren't. Ground crew, soldiers, gun crews, anyone who'd been exposed when the attack came. The Germans who'd surrounded him were gone. Weber was gone. Whether they'd run, taken cover, or been hit, couldn't tell. He was alone in the middle of a battlefield that looked like the end of the world. The fires continued burning. Ammunition continued cooking off. But the American fighters were gone, climbing back to altitude, heading home. Pushed himself to his knees, then to his feet. His head was ringing. Blood still dripped from the cut above his eye. His flight suit was covered in dirt and debris. He looked around, searching for threats, finding none. The Germans were focused on firefighting, on casualties, on trying to salvage anything from the wreckage. Nobody was looking at him. Started walking, not toward the tree line, that would be obvious, toward one of the damaged buildings near the airfield perimeter. There would be tools there, maybe clothing, maybe food. He'd need all 3 if he was going to survive the next 24 hours, while waiting for friendly forces to advance into this area. He'd made it 20 meters when he heard vehicles approaching. Not German vehicles. The engine sounds were wrong. American jeeps moving fast, accompanied by the distinctive rumble of M4 Sherman tanks. The ground troops that followed up after airstrikes, exploiting the chaos, securing territory while the enemy was still disorganized. Stopped walking, raised his hands, waited. The first jeep pulled up 30 meters away. American soldiers, weapons ready, scanning for threats. One of them saw, shouted something, pointed. 3 soldiers ran toward him, rifles aimed, then lowered as they recognized the flight suit, the insignia, the fact that he was American. "You the guy who went down," one of them shouted. Nodded. "Your friends called it in, said you went down on the airfield. They hit this place pretty good." "I noticed," said. "They got him into a jeep." A medic looked at the cut above his eye, declared it non-serious, wrapped it with gauze. Someone gave him water. Someone else gave him a cigarette that he didn't smoke but held anyway because it was something to do with his hands. The ground force secured the airfield in 20 minutes. The Germans who'd survived the strike surrendered quickly, offered no resistance. Why would they? Their aircraft were destroyed, their ammunition was cooking off, their operations building was collapsed. Fighting was pointless. Watched from the jeep as American soldiers moved through the wreckage, checking for survivors, securing weapons, establishing a perimeter. The fires would burn for hours. The smoke would be visible until nightfall. Someone brought him to a field hospital 3 kilometers away. They checked him for concussion, cleaned the cut properly, gave him hot food and coffee. A captain from intelligence debriefed him. What had he seen? What had he observed? What could he report about the airfield's defenses? Told him everything. The dispersal patterns, the fuel storage location, the ammunition depot, the flak positions. Information that was now academic since the airfield was destroyed, but information that would be useful for analyzing why the strike had been so effective. You were on the ground during the attack, the captain asked. Yes. That must have been terrifying. Thought about it. About lying in the dirt while P-47s made strafing runs overhead. About the sound of .50 caliber fire and fuel tanks exploding. About Weber and the 4 soldiers who'd surrounded him, now dead or scattered. About 41 seconds that felt like 41 hours. I knew they were coming, he said. I saw my wingman circling. Standard doctrine marked the position, call for help. So I knew it was just a matter of time. Still, the captain said, being on the ground while your own side attacks. Better than being in a POW camp, said. They sent him back to England 2 days later. His squadron welcomed him with the particular brand of dark humor that combat pilots reserved for situations that could have ended differently. Someone had already painted a German flag on the side of his replacement P-47, credit for destroying 1 enemy airfield from the inside. Flew 37 more missions before the war ended. He shot down 2 more aircraft, destroyed several ground targets, survived 3 more close calls with flak damage. None of it compared to those 41 seconds lying on a German airfield, while American fighters tore it apart. There are 2 ways to understand what happened on that airfield in December 1944. The first is tactical. American fighter doctrine worked exactly as designed. Aggressive airfield attacks, rapid response to downed aircrew, coordinated strikes using radio communications. A pilot went down. His wingman marked the position. Other fighters responded. The target was destroyed. Doctrine executed perfectly. The second is about information asymmetry. Knew something the Germans didn't. He saw the circling aircraft. He understood what it meant. He calculated the timing. And he spent 5 minutes identifying targets for an attack he knew was coming, while the Germans thought they'd captured a defeated enemy. Both explanations are true. Both matter. But here's what really matters. In December 1944, an American pilot crashed on an enemy airfield, was pulled from his aircraft bleeding, and surrounded by armed soldiers who thought they'd captured a prisoner. Instead of despairing, instead of surrendering mentally to his situation, Robert did the math. He saw his wingman circling. He knew American doctrine. He calculated 40 seconds, and he laughed. Because he understood something his captors didn't. He wasn't a prisoner on their airfield. They were targets on his. 41 seconds later, the Germans understood it too. But by then it was too late. The airfield was silent, not because fighting had stopped, but because there was nothing left to fight for. The aircraft were destroyed. The facilities were burning. The runway was cratered and was walking away. The German officer who'd stood over him with a pistol was gone. The soldiers who'd pulled him from the cockpit were scattered or dead. The airfield that had survived the first attack was destroyed by the second. All because one pilot saw something they didn't, calculated something they couldn't, and laughed at a situation they thought they controlled. That's the story, not about rescue, not about luck, about understanding, about seeing the pattern others missed. About knowing, really knowing with mathematical certainty, that cavalry was coming, that doctrine would work, that 40 seconds from now everything would change. And about having the presence of mind, while bleeding and surrounded and standing on enemy ground, to scan the airfield one more time, identify the targets, and make sure that when those 41 seconds came, they counted. Survived the war. Went home to Ohio. Became a civil aviation inspector for the FAA, spending 40 years making sure aircraft were maintained properly, that pilots followed procedures, that the systems worked the way they were supposed to work. The same attention to detail that had kept him alive during the war kept thousands of commercial passengers safe afterward. He died in 1996 at age 74. The obituary mentioned his service, his decorations, his career. It didn't mention the airfield. It didn't mention the 41 seconds. It didn't mention standing in the middle of enemy territory, surrounded by armed soldiers, laughing because he knew something they didn't. Some stories don't make it into obituaries, but they're worth remembering anyway. Because sometimes the difference between capture and survival, between defeat and victory, between dying on foreign ground and going home, sometimes that difference is 41 seconds and the ability to see what's coming before anyone else does. Roberts saw it, calculated it, waited for it, survived it, and laughed while the clock was counting down.